all right, you brought God up, so how do you feel about God? And how does religion play into all of this? And you grew up in a religious family, right?
Not really. Okay. I grew up in a family that was respectful of tradition, Jewish tradition, but we would go to temple for the holidays, and we would celebrate the major holidays of the year, but I wouldn't really say that we were religious. And as I've gotten older, I've even moved further away from participating in many of those traditions. And my view, though, overall, is that religion is another one of the human stories that we tell in order to grasp ourselves more fully. And for me, it's a vital part of who we are. And for many today, it's still a vital part of how they make sense of the world. I mean, science, fantastic for understanding the external world, right? If you want to figure out things about the Big Bang or the spectral lines of hydrogen, don't turn to scripture. It's not going to be a good way forward, but turn to quantum mechanics and quantum field theory. It does a great job. But if you're turning your attention inward, not the objective world, but the subjective world, the things that matter to you, and trying to grasp what your awareness is all about and how you fit into some larger story that makes you feel happier or makes you feel part of a tradition that may have gone on for thousands of years, then religious practice is very good for that kind of inner journey. And therefore, unlike some of my colleagues who want to wipe religion off the face of the earth, my view is cherry pick religion. Don't take it literally. Accept those parts that work for you. And if none of it works, fantastic. But if some of it works, if some of the tradition and ritual and perspective helps you fully understand your role in reality, fantastic.
But not for you.
Not for me, because that's not even completely true. Because as I describe in the book, while I don't really practice any of the Jewish tradition that I was raised within, when my father died, a minyan, a quorum of Jewish men, which is what it needed to be, came to our house to recite the Kaddish prayer. And it was consoling. And I felt part of this lineage going back thousands of years, and it helped me through a very difficult moment. I think that's a great use of this kind of human invention and not something that I would want to wipe off the face of the earth.
Yeah, one of the guests I've had on the show is Rupert Sheldrake, and he wrote a book called Science and Spiritual Practices. And I think one of the assertions of the last 100 years, we've gotten very scientific and we've thrown out religion because it doesn't hold up to the test of science. But we forgot that religion is actually, I call it technology for keeping a human society functional.
Yeah.
So we've thrown out everything that we used to treasure, such as pilgrimages, gathering together, singing together, all of these rituals that give our lives meaning. And since it's part of this religiosity, we're like, we don't play that anymore. But we need it as humans. Like you said, we need the closure at a funeral. So what do we do instead? We go to a football game and we chant. And
we become part of a tribe.
Yeah,
so a lot of what you just said I agree with, but I do need to say that Rupert Sheldrake is somebody who, at least in my interactions with him in the past, struck me as, how would I say, a bit of a nutter. So I'm reluctant to say anything that aligns me with somebody who has described a view of the world that is the antithesis of my view of the world.
He's got his morphic resonance, and the dog expects you going home and all that stuff. So I hear what you're saying with that. So totally get what you're saying with that. And my science education makes me kind of wonder about some of that stuff too. Although it does also make me question sometimes the religiousness of the scientific community, as if it must be this way only.
Yeah, but I'll tell you something. I was invited to a gathering of scientists some years ago called Science and the Spiritual Quest. And I had thought, and it was described to me as a closed-door meeting that you couldn't talk about, but now I think I can. I'm not going to give any names. And it was scientists around a table, and it was to talk about views of religion and spirituality. I thought going in that it was going to be the most boring conversation, that everybody would say the same thing that I was saying. God might exist, no evidence for it, we allow for the possibility, blah, 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 that sort of thing. I was the only person that had that perspective at that meeting. There were Nobel laureates at that meeting who were deeply religious. And that was an eye-opener to me because it showed me how close-minded I had been in my view of how people engage with these ideas, with religious practice. And it drove me to read a book that I would recommend to everybody by William James called The Varieties of Religious Experience, written back in 1905 based on lectures that he gave in 1902, 1903 in Scotland. And he was a scientist, a psychologist, a great scientist of his era. And he did a wonderful study of the ways in which people, a variety of backgrounds, engage with religious ideas. And it just shows you how different and how rich and varied the religious experience can be. And to me, it has really enriched my understanding with how humankind engages with ideas that may seem foreign from a scientific perspective, but can be deeply valued from a humanistic perspective.
So it's the duality of being a human. You
Yes.
can entertain a religious idea that has no science-based and also scientific phenomenon.
And it's because the yardstick for the religious ideas is not whether they can explain data in the external world. It's whether they make sense in an internal, singular, subjective way. And that's a different way of judging ideas.